Puppy Pirates of Poltid, a Black Ocean short story. Written by J.S. Morin. Narrated by Michael Naramore. In a little corner of the galaxy, on a little planet that looked a lot like Earth, there was a little village whose inhabitants were not little at all. For centuries they had prowled the swamps and jungles, the savannas and the prairies. Few in number compared to the dominant species on other worlds, they perched atop a food chain with sauropods and theropods beneath. In more recent times, they had discovered space travel, or more accurately, space travelers had discovered them. It set off a revolution in societal development, technological adoption, and planetary government that transformed the species. Their word for themselves was klemekoo. Translated to the most common trade language of the galaxy, it meant munching giants. Though many species contended that they looked like oversized canines, and some continued to call them megalodogs, their official diplomatic position was that they were not. The leader of this renaissance was a star traveler who returned to his people as a visionary. Kubu the Rakur, a fierce shaman who'd studied magic from aliens and whose might single-handedly kept the klemekoo unified, dwelt in a humble village surrounded by starports, shopping centers, and alien embassies. They named it Olidem, which meant nothing in their own language but amused their leader for some reason. At the outskirts of Olidem lay a verdant jungle where prey was scarce, but it all belonged to the klemekoo. Just where the village and the jungle met, a school educated the klemekoo young on the ways of the wider galaxy. A gray-furred teacher prowled the head of the open-air classroom in front of an imported data board that the klemekoo couldn't make on World.
Now set aside your data pads and turn your attention here. We will be learning how power works in an electrical circuit. This will be important later in life, especially for those of you who choose to visit the stars.
At the very back of the class, two brothers shared a glance. The elder of the pair, by a whole 33 minutes, was Danu, and his younger twin was named Mordo. They were the children of Kubu the Rakur, though neither had earned a lofty title of their own yet. Kubu had named them Donald and Mordecai, after his adoptive alien grandfather and the first human to communicate with their people respectively. But those were awkward names, and the more klemekoo-sounding monikers had caught on in their place. Danu leaned to his side and spoke without moving his jowls.
I don't plan to be a mechanic. You?
Mordo shook his head slightly.
You think we need to stay? Nope. You? Nuh-uh. Quiet then. Let's go.
The pair ducked and slunk away when the teacher's tail was turned. He droned on about wires and connectors and fiddly little human-sized systems that smaller people could worry about for all either of them cared. Jungle foliage welcomed them. Well-worn paths from recess playtimes, recent and long past, gave way to denser plant coverage and newer scents. They snuffled at game trails and listened to birds. They raced and chased and drank from the river upstream of the village before diving in and swimming across. Shaking dry on the far side, Mordo asked his brother,
What now? Let's go check out that smuggler's port.
Mordo cocked his head.
Is that why we crossed the river? Dad said to stay to the end of school every day,
Danu reminded him. Mordo perked up.
Yeah, he did.
His tail started to wag of its own accord.
I guess if we're already in trouble. Exactly. Let's get in as much fun as we can before someone catches us and makes us go back.
Neither of them knew the way. It didn't matter. Noses to the air, they followed the scent of starship fuel. Despite their size and dark fur, the two brothers approached the illegal landing yard undetected. Rumors said they stayed hidden from tech by magic stones buried in the ground. Rumors also said that no one had discovered the location of the smuggler's port and lived to tell about it. Rumors said a lot of things. But here it was. A few 100 meters across, it was a swath of deforested jungle packed flat and paved over with lumpy asphalt. If someone forced the smugglers to abandon this location, another just like it could be operating in mere hours. The ramshackle hut of a warehouse could either be left to rust away or quickly be packed up and toted along. Currently, 2 vessels parked on the landing pad. One was a blocky freighter that was probably responsible for the mountain of crates and boxes stacked outside the tiny warehouse. Both brothers winced at the sudden, high-pitched whine as the ion engines powered up. When the vessel lifted off, they got a good view of the second craft.
"Is that what I think it is?"
Mordo asked breathlessly. Danu nodded emphatically.
"Yeah, that's the Starless Night. Does that mean that's Vanku?"
The name was legendary among the Klemekoo. Maybe not up there with Kubu, but Kubu was a politician, an explorer, a diplomat. Those were boring dreams for a new generation of pups. The shaggy, golden-furred ship captain down there was an outlaw. Better yet, a pirate outlaw. Most Klemekoo pirates operated out of large vessels, hunting megafreighters and transports throughout unaligned space. But Vanku was more daring than that, more reckless, more admirable. He flew solo and hunted for himself. As the pair watched, rapt, Vanku and a pair of humans boarded a hover and jetted off into the jungle on the far side.
"You think they smelled us? You think they'd have left that ship by itself if they had?"
They were downwind. Each could clearly smell that no one was left at the landing yard. Thoughts of unmanned security systems, cameras, and booby traps were for older, wiser Klemekoo. As the pair raced down to have a look at the little pirate starship, no thought of safety entered their heads. Danu bounded sideways as he circled the craft.
"This is the tastiest ship! I want one just like it!"
Mordo paused to sniff one of the landing gear struts where a number of notorious pirates had left their mark. This Vanku guy knew everybody. He'd met Trubku, Oran the Grek, Nanu the Double, Pegnar, Wesley, and even Fenbo the Skaldur. Danu cocked his head, one ear flopping over.
"You mean it? Yeah. No classes, no chores, no responsibilities, just space and a ship and all the little mean people to steal from." "How about we take it for a fly?"
Mordo stopped his fan sniffing in an instant.
"No."
His brother's hopeful grin only spread.
"Really?"
Danu raced for the open boarding ramp.
"Come on, quick run. We'll put it right back before he even notices it's gone."
The controls couldn't have been simpler. Everything had already been extensively adapted for Klemekoo physiology. All the systems were labeled, and both brothers could speak and read English. Dad was working on a written language for Klemekoo, but it was slow to take off since no one knew it. English teachers had been easy to come by, and starships came with English instructions. Thus, it took little time to close up the ramp, power the engines, and lift off the ground. This is the point, in general, where a sensible sentient would have expected to run into some difficulty with codes or lockouts or any number of countermeasures against starship theft. However, given that the ship's captain was possibly the most notorious of Klemekoo pirates, an already terrifying scourge wherever they operated, Vanku had never entertained the possibility that anyone would attempt to steal it from him. While 2 young Klemekoo were skipping a lesson today, a much older Klemekoo was about to learn one the hard way. Mordo took the helm. This ship was a joy to fly. Everything felt just right in his paws. No, if anything, the steering stick and throttle were a tad big for him. With so much technology adapted from the smaller species, just handling devices sturdy enough to withstand casual use was rare. But to find something customized for his own people tickled him to no end.
Stop snickering, Danu snapped. We're professionals now. Real spacers.
Not for another 18 seconds, Mordo corrected as he referenced the atmospheric gauge. So far, his suborbital piloting skills were translating nicely to this more capable craft. Poltid fell away below them. On most Earth-likes, there would have been protocols for departing the planet. Orbital traffic controls, customs inspections, designated travel lanes, keep-out zones for satellites and satellite habitats. None of these trivialities bothered Poltid. The few scattered satellites in orbit would have been a bullseye to clip by accident. Little enough traffic came and went that pilots and captains exercised their own judgment not to get in one another's way. Plus, there was the added fact that the Starless Night didn't run any kind of tracking, ID, or even running lights. It was a ship meant not to be found. And most respectable people, not plainly tasked with countering piracy, pretended not to take note, even when they might have stumbled across it.
Where to?
Mordo inquired proudly as he leveled out and assumed a high orbit of his homeworld. His tail thumped repeatedly into his brother, who sat behind him. No biped-shaped chairs forced them to keep tails tucked in. Both parked their keisters on the floor cushions meant for Vanku and whomever he chose as passenger. Danu reached past to fiddle with the dashboard consoles.
Looks like there's a flight plan. Should keep us from getting lost. We're not going to get lost.
The high-pitched whine from Danu called that suggestion into question.
Fine. We use the flight plan. Let me just park us so we can astral drop.
It says to use 5.
Doesn't sound that deep.
Dad's been really deep, but that doesn't mean this isn't.
We should be really fast.
Danu reached for the star drive controls, but Mordo shoulder-blocked him.
Hey, I'm flying. You can be pilot on the way back.
Fine,
Danu replied with a growl at the back of his throat. Firsties was a rule, after all. If only he'd been faster up the ramp. Pulling the slider that sent them into the astral was a little like a water slide. You made the choice and went. Then the world seemed to fall out from under you. Unlike the water park attraction, this version didn't come with a colorful ride and a fun splash at the end. It just terminated in a boring gray void. Mordo made a show of studying the controls, but the flight plan had already pointed them toward their heading. He had the choice of manual or autopilot, and chose the more fun of the two options.
This is great!
Danu seemed less convinced.
Want to see what he has for hollows? He's a pirate! He probably has everything.
It was hours to their destination. It would be more hours getting back. There was only so much talking a Klemekoo and his brother could do without rehashing the same old ground. The pair passed the time watching stuff that they definitely weren't allowed to view at home. A soft howl from the cockpit signaled their arrival. Not that one place in astral space looked any different than another, but the computer knew the difference. Mordo raced to the pilot's cushion and checked.
Yep, this is the place.
Did it say what's here? A treasure, maybe?
If it is, we're not robbing Vanku.
Good point.
Mordo dropped them out of astral to see for themselves. The nav computer didn't claim it as any particular star system, and real space seemed to agree with that assessment. No planets, no space stations, no sun that was any closer than the little pinprick lights of stars way, way off in the distance. But there were 2 ships. One was bigger than the other, but both were far larger than the Starless Night.
Wonder who they are, Danu mused aloud. Should we calm them? In a stolen ship? Mordo asked incredulously. Besides, those look Eindar to me. Maybe Vanku was planning to attack them. That would explain them being on a flight plan. Lucky for them, we're not actually pirates. Does one of those ships look meaner than the other?
The meaner of the two ships the brothers had stumbled upon was, unbeknownst to them, a Xeric-class Eindar destroyer. Its companion freighter had been Vanku's target, and if Vanku had been at the controls, he'd have zipped right back to the deep astral rather than fight the military escort. The Eindar, having set this ambush, didn't waste time on pleasantries or threats. They opened fire. The Starless Night rocked. Acting on hologame instincts, Mordo spun them into a roll that avoided the next volley. Say this for Vanku's ship, it handled like a dragonfly.
Shoot back, Danu shouted. Find the comms,
Mordo replied in a panic. Fully preoccupied with evasive maneuvering, he had no spare paws for finding buttons nor eyes to take off the combat displays to look for them.
Move a little! I'm busy! Stop getting a shot! Stop distracting me! Move aside! Let me fly!
A brief shoving match ensued, during which a baying alarm warned that they'd lost shields. Mordo knocked his brother aside.
We need a plan!
He resumed evasive maneuvers, but there was no chance of winning against the Eindar warship.
If only we could fight them in person instead of with ships.
A brilliant idea occurred to Mordo.
Let's board them! Duh. Going straight at them, we'd get shot to pieces. Not the warship, the freighter. But then we'd be stuck on the freighter.
Mordo shrugged and altered course.
It'll give us a fighting chance.
The freighter grew and grew. An impact clamp readout blinked red. They were on target. The blinking grew quicker. Incoming fire dried up as the Eindar would be hitting the ship they were trying to protect. Faster and faster, the boarding clamp indicator blinked. Then it turned solid red. Mordo hit the big plunger button beside it. Suddenly, in a programmed maneuver, the Starless Night cut engines and executed a thruster spin to point their aft toward the freighter. Mordo and Danu were staring straight at the oncoming warship as their stolen ride slammed into the hull of the Eindar freighter. The jolt sent Mordo and Danu crashing into one another and into the dashboard controls. Engines fired briefly, threatening to tear the Starless Night from its grip on the freighter. An errant blast of plasma from the little ship's formidable cannons flew well wide of the warship.
Ow! Get off! Move it! What now? Go aboard, just like the Hollows.
Holovids, sadly, portrayed a rather tilted view of the Klemekoo people. It showed them as merciless and savage hunters of innocent ships deep in the Black Ocean. But it did give something of a game plan for the attacking side in a boarding action. Danu led the way, racing through Vanku's little ship and through the breaching tunnel. Realistically, it was little more than an inverted jaw that jabbed through a hull and opened wide to provide an airtight boarding tube. Mordo followed close on his tail. Unfortunately, the Eindar watched Holovids too. By the time the twins had gathered their wits and launched an assault, the freighter's security team was positioned at the breach with blasters out. Various military squads across the galaxy train their soldiers on tactics best suited to their physiology and psychology. Like humans, Eindar tended to seek cover, set defenses, and use pack tactics and battlefield terrain to their advantage. Even littler species, such as Laku and Ratataret, preferred to cede ground indefinitely, allowing enemies to overextend and leave themselves open to flanking attacks and sabotage. Nearly all sentient species feared blaster fire as an immediate threat to their lives. But the kind of firepower that could hurt a klemekoo was also capable of punching right through ship hulls and destroying one's own ship from the inside. The brothers barreled straight into the line of fire as insect sting plasma pelted their fur. Paws batted, jaws snapped. Eindar flew. Bones broke. Rather than finish off the survivors, which seemed to be most, if not all, of the Eindar security troops, Danu and Mordo simply chewed the discarded and scattered weapons into inoperability.
That was easy,
Mordo noted as he caught his breath and scanned the corridors.
Yeah, no kidding. The one that got me in the face, do you think it'll leave a scar?
Mordo cocked his head and appraised the scorched fur.
Nope, you're stuck looking like me once new fur grows in. Darn. Maybe there are more.
Danu shook his head.
We need to get to their bridge. This is hostage stuff now.
Lucky for the brothers, the ship's layout wasn't complicated. It was largely a cargo hold with a little area for people to keep it flying. They'd struck the ladder, and they didn't have far to go to reach the command center of the freighter.
Open up,
Danu ordered, poking the door controls with a paw. It bleeped and blooped and refused his efforts. The fact that neither of them read Eindar and the tiny buttons were hard to pick out individually didn't help matters. But one conclusion was unavoidable.
They locked us out.
Mordo scratched at the seam where the door met the wall. He couldn't get enough purchase to force it open.
Stand back,
Danu told him. Then, backing up, he took 2 running paces and slammed into the door head first.
Wham! It's a slidey, not a swingy,
Mordo pointed out helpfully.
But look, it dented. Give me some help.
True enough. There was a nearly half-meter deep depression in the door. It probably wouldn't have slid again if it wanted to. Mordo took his turn, backing up to the wall behind him to push off and launching himself full tilt into the door. The dent deepened. Danu's next turn sent him spilling onto the freighter's bridge. Switching to English while still sprawled on his side, he told the crew,
"Sorry about the door. We need to talk."
His brother followed him inside, nodding his agreement.
And fast.
The Eindar crew cowered behind workstations and one another. They barked and yipped. It was the kind of noise Xenos made when trying to tell Klemekoo what their own language sounded like. Everything was parts of words, but none of it made a bit of sense.
"Do you speak Klemekoo?"
Mordo asked slowly, trying not to frighten them further. More unintelligible canine noises came in reply.
"What about English?"
Danu asked. Nothing any clearer came through in response.
"Hey, you know any Eindar?"
Mordo asked his brother.
"Just a few swears. Near as I can tell, these guys are being polite."
That was no help. Peeking at the tiny Eindar readouts on the bridge workstations, Mordo noticed a smaller vessel approaching from the warship.
I think we're about to have guests." "Well, that's good. Maybe we can fly that over to the warship." "Why do we want to be there?" "Not going to get home in this thing. Not with that big bad gunship watching us." "Good point." "What about them?" Danu asked.
Mordo gave it some consideration.
"Only one thing I can think of right now."
With that, he reached down and picked up one of the Eindar who didn't look to be in charge. The others protested, but given the language barrier, there wasn't a whole lot he could think of to allay their fears. This was going to have to be a demonstration, and it couldn't take place here.
"Guard the rest. I'll be right back."
Mordo carried the sobbing, terrified Eindar through the ship, walking on 3 legs. Did this logistics officer, or whatever the Eindar called freighter people, really think he was a shy eater, taking him to be devoured privately? While the ship may have been large, the site of the boarding fight hadn't been far. Mordo put his prisoner feet down on the ground amid the wreckage of broken Eindar. When the bridge officer didn't budge, Mordo gave him a gentle bump from behind with his nose.
Go on, help them. It's okay.
The Eindar turned and looked up at him.
Okay?
Finally, a word in common.
Okay,
Mordo agreed. With the most basic of understandings in place, the Eindar rushed off and returned in short order with a med kit. Maybe he was no doctor, that would have been too great a coincidence, but the Eindar knew enough about his own species to use the contents of a med kit. Mordo was on his way back to the bridge when he heard the slam-bang crash of another boarding party connecting with the hull. Throwing back his head, he howled a warning to his brother. A booming voice in passable klemekoo shouted from a nearby corridor.
Surrender, Vanku!
Oh, poop on the floor. This was a trap for Vanku? Was that why they fired without warning? A moment earlier, he'd just been expecting more blaster-armed soldiers to rough up. Now, knowing that these Eindar were thinking that Vanku was here, they had to have had a plan for fighting klemekoo.
Danu, careful! They think we're Vanku!
Blaster fire tore walls to shreds. Molten steel sprayed from glowing red holes as Eindar shock troops sprayed around corners before each advance. Time and again, Mordo and Danu fell back, unsure what that plasma would feel like carving through their thick protective fur.
What do we do now?
Danu asked. Already whistling holes signaled the loss of atmosphere along their path of retreat.
Maybe we have to really fight.
Danu shook his head.
But Dad said Dad isn't here. We can't just make blasters stop working and force them to play nice. We either stop them or they kill us.
It was a sobering thought. They were young. Invincibility was an easy thought to have when surrounded by easy jungle prey and tiny, fragile Xenos. But both had broken enough steel objects in their short years that they knew the kind of damage those Eindar blasters were doing to the ship.
Maybe we can surrender. Pirates don't get to surrender. But we're not Vanku. Somehow, I don't think they're going to just let us go because they caught the wrong pirates. We're not—
Mordo stopped him mid-sentence.
Yes, today we are. Let's get into the cargo hold. What if they open the doors? If they don't come in after us, we bash our way back out. I have an even better idea,
Mordo said, as the pair raced ahead of the Eindar pursuers, crashing off walls and one another in their jostling haste. The cargo bay wasn't locked. Doors opened at the press of a panel. Once the pair had squeezed inside, Mordo slashed his claws through the door controls. Sparks flew. Electricity crackled. The doors stayed open. Stacks of piled crates lay lashed down all over the hold. Aisles just wide enough for a grav sled allowed the brothers to disappear into the maze. Shouted Eindar commands and clipped military diction signaled that the troops had arrived and were starting their search. Eindar, by most accounts, had pretty good hearing. Better than many species. Certainly better than humans or tessuds. Not as good as Azran. Not as good as klemekoo. But finding two giant canids careening through a cargo hold was no trick. Even their panting was loud enough to track them by sound alone. But perhaps the Eindar weren't as aware that their quieter, more deliberate movements through irregular terrain that dampened and confused sound weren't an impossible task for klemekoo ears. Stacks of cargo toppled without warning. Soldiers expecting to lay ambushes and spring traps around corners suddenly found those very corners vanishing as the terrain shifted. Shipments of random contents, bound for parts unknown to the twins, crushed flimsy bipedal bodies. Howls and screams echoed through the cargo hold. The smell of blood flooded the air. Panicked blaster fire petered out. Danu and Mordo converged on the last surviving Eindar from the assault team. He lay on the floor, blaster rifle out of reach, pinned beneath a crate leaking whole barley. Mordo shifted the crate aside as Danu bit the end of the barrel off and spat it 12 meters into the debris.
English or klemekoo?
Mordo asked.
Please don't kill me,
The Eindar soldier pleaded in English.
We need to send a message,
Mordo told him. The bargain, he felt, was clear enough. The Eindar glanced around.
We have received it.
No, not that. A real comm. The bridge crew only speaks Eindar and we can't read it. You need to help translate.
The Eindar nodded, clearly in pain.
For my life, I will.
Tell him again.
Mordo growled in the back of his throat, startling the Eindar-speaking crew without meaning to. But he was growing frustrated with the lack of progress. While a basic surrender had been simple enough, the translation chain to send a comm back to Poltid wasn't going as well.
They say you must speak to Mrago,
The wounded soldier insisted. Mordo shook his head, scattering a spray of spittle.
I don't know who that is, and I don't care. Comm Poltid.
Poltid is not there. Mragro is there. Who is Mragro?
Danu demanded. Their audience was decidedly siding with the translator, yipping little bits of what they could only assume was advice or criticism of the process. Maybe they could get him to do a better job. The soldier pointed.
Ship. Our ship is Mragro.
Well, pee up a tree. That changed things.
We don't want to talk to them. We want to talk to Poltid. Poltid is a planet. Our planet.
An argument broke out that included a lot of Eindar jibber-jabber and pointing at one of the workstations, presumably main comms.
Problem. We can hear, but not speak. The comm? Broken. You break when you attack. Not us, you.
Great. I don't care whose fault this is. We need to fix it and send a message.
Mordo was losing patience with the incompetence on display. Was this how grown-ups managed the galaxy? On rickety ships and not knowing the galaxy's major languages? Ready to shoot over nothing and throw lives away on misunderstandings? Danu lay with his chin pillowed on his front paws, keeping out of the way.
Be a nice time to know how to fix a comm,
he muttered. Someone reached over and flicked a switch. The comms spoke. Fortunately, the Eindar on the warship seemed to understand who they were dealing with.
Vanku, we will bargain. Surrender and your remains will be returned to your people for your primitive burial rites. If we are forced to destroy that ship, I will purge our waste reclaim over the wreckage.
Danu whined. Rude. Mordo wasn't sure where he stood on the afterlife. So many aliens had their own klemekoo-inclusive beliefs about what happened after death that he wasn't sure how much he was worried about someone essentially urinating on his unconsecrated grave as opposed to the death itself. But without comms, he couldn't put a voice to his objections directly.
Flash the exterior lights.
He realized he'd strayed outside his translator's vocabulary.
Lights outside the ship. Turn them on, then off. A bunch.
The order went through the necessary cross-culture garbling, and one of the crew made it happen. It didn't take long for another broadcast to come in.
You may have disabled that ship, but we will not negotiate for your life. You may spare whatever survivors remain and earn mercy in death. That is your best and only offer. You have 2 hours and 16 minutes to decide.
Those extra 16 minutes were weird, but Mordo chalked it up to someone converting from the funny units of time the Eindar counted in. It probably came out to a round number for them.
We need to make a comm quick.
Their translator flung a hand toward the comm panel.
You hear him?
Danu snarled.
They're going to kill us. I won't die hungry.
Even Mordo found that a little scary. Tales of klemekoo pirates eating crews of ships that resisted them were, he'd been told, largely propaganda.
How? No comm out. Just comm in.
Mordo had to credit the poor guy. He hadn't soiled himself like several of the crew had. Danu sprang to his feet, startling all the little creatures huddling together for safety on the bridge. His wagging tail crashed into ship controls, but he clearly didn't care.
I have an idea! What?
Mordo was up for just about anything at this point. His brother pointed an emphatic paw at the translator's head.
He doesn't have a helmet. Yeah, kinda dumb. No, but they had helmets. The soldiers, that is. This guy lost his before we brought him here. But there are comms in the helmets. I bet we can boost a signal through the ship's transmitter. Who's this we? And what makes you think that's even what's wrong with the comms? Okay, I don't know, but it's an idea. And they have to know how to do something that simple with their own stuff. You, Eindar guy, tell them to use a helmet to fix the comm.
The translator cocked his head, and thus ensued several precious minutes of chopping the instructions down into easier and easier words until a plan traveled from Danu to translator to crew to helmet to bridge to comm panel. With Mordo clutching the helmet as a handheld mic, the crew member who'd been performing the patch job started entering digits on a display with unfamiliar numerals. Danu hooked a paw around the Eindar and bodily pulled him out of reach of the controls.
No!
Danu scolded. Among the little language any of them shared, that one word crossed species boundaries. Mordo glared at their translator, making sure he had the Eindar's full attention.
You enter the comm ID I tell you, you live. Just the way I tell you. Okay?
The Eindar stank of fear, but gulped and nodded. When the ID was entered, a blip indicated Mordo had an open channel.
Dad, we made a mistake. Send help, fast!
Two ships hung motionless in real space, far from any planetary star system. In the stillness of that void, it would have been easy not to notice the tense standoff taking place. But as he sat on the command cushion of his flagship, Kubu knew better. He'd received his son's distress call. When the Eindar warship Mragro closed the distance to the helpless freighter, he realized he had gotten there just in time.
Calm them,
Kubu ordered. The enemy vessel answered on visuals immediately. A captain with a data monocle and a snarling expression took up a holographic field in front of the klemekoo leader.
This is no place for you, klemekoo vessel. You are in Eindar Empire territory. Begone, or we will fire on you. You are Galgo, captain of the Eindar Imperial vessel Mragro. I am Kubu the Rakur. I speak for the Klemekoo, and currently in command of the Brenku, which means biggest mean one in my language. You have fired on a stolen ship piloted by 2 children, and now you engage in a standoff with them. 2 children. My children. You have us outgunned, but you will not stop us from boarding you. I have 80 warriors. They are not children. You and all your crew will be eaten. And if my boys are not returned safe, I will declare a feast on the Eindar Empire.
It was a bluff, but a small one. His own people would likely oust him if he tried to take on the entire Eindar Empire over the deaths of Donald and Mordecai. But his crew would certainly be all in favor of murdering everyone aboard the Mragro, whether or not any eating ensued as a result. The Brenku drifted at low speed toward the 2 Eindar ships as Kubu awaited a reply. Not a quarter the size of the Mragro, the main weapon that would even the vast disparity in firepower, were the 4 articulated arms poised like scorpion stingers in a cross pattern all around the vessel's exterior. Each was strong enough to force a boarding on even the sturdiest hull. Each was a hypodermic needle injecting a lethal boarding force onto any ship that couldn't evade them. This was taking too long. He needed to scare Captain Galgo in cutting his losses and accepting a withdrawal. He tapped a shipwide comm.
Prepare a howl on my signal.
All across the Brenku, comm panels opened on a single channel. His comms officer, Urun, poised at the button to transmit. Reaching into a pop-up panel at his side, Kubu retrieved a tiny helmet and plunked it gently onto Cuddles' head. The kitty, knowing that it was about to get loud, merely yawned and curled into a circle by Kubu's right foot, knowing his delicate little ears were protected. Kubu sucked in a big breath. His bridge crew did likewise. Urun opened the comm. "Ow!" With a quick yip, Urun signaled that the channel was now closed.
Full speed. Put us between the freighter and the Mragro.
Eindar ship is breaking off, Pungo informed him from tactical.
Send a shuttle to pick up my boys. Give chase. Force the Mragro to speed up if they want to keep us away.
The threat of boarding was proportional to the proximity of 2 vessels.
They're stopping, dropping into astral.
While Kubu waited, he removed Cuddles' helmet and petted him.
Shuttle reports they have Donu and Mordo.
Kubu nodded.
Good. Intercept the shuttle. Let's go home.
Sir, the shuttle is contacting us. Mordo wishes to speak with you.
Urun looked wary at the prospect. But family drama had no place on the bridge of a starship. This whole encounter was unseemly enough already.
No, I will deal with them when we reach Poltid.
The tribunal seemed like a bit much. Mordo and Danu sat in the dirt, ears back as they heard the charges listed. Worse, it was Dad who was shaming them in front of the whole village. There had to have been 10,000 people in attendance, in a stadium meant for sports, not justice.
Did you do everything you have been charged with?
Dad asked. He sat up in the row of seats meant for an announcer, and his voice carried all through the stadium. Of course they'd done it all. This was a legalese version of the exact story they'd told their father. It would have been a political attack to contradict him in front of all these people. Mordo and Danu craned their necks and spoke clearly into the microphone in unison.
Yes.
Like their father, their voices broadcast for the whole crowd to hear. The only saving grace was that off-world broadcast was forbidden, so only the people here would bear witness to their humiliation.
Vanku, take the speaking spot. You wish to say something.
Dad stepped aside. Brawny and half a head taller than their father, Vanku might not have been the very largest of the klemekoo, but thanks to his reputation, he seemed the fiercest. He took the judge's place and addressed the microphone.
My ship, the Starless Knight, was my primary means of earning my living. I request reparations from the accused, not from their father.
From them? What money did either of them have? That ship must have cost a fortune. A custom-build job out of the Garelon shipyards, it would take years, maybe a lifetime, of legitimate work to replace. Mordo and Danu would have had to go into piracy themselves to pay him back, whether via the guns and ships version or the human style with companies and stocks. Just as Mordo was considering whether his recent accidental venture into piracy was the kind of life he'd want, and as Danu was picking out the pirate nickname he'd want, Dad retook the speaking position.
Vanku, step down and join the accused as I give my judgment.
Vanku narrowed one eye at their father. Though they were too far to hear, both knew the little tensing of muscles at Dad's neck when he growled. The pirate hopped down into the playing area and sauntered over to the twins. Dad puffed his chest and tried to look official. To his sons, he always looked like he was pretending.
Vanku, you left a dangerous and illegal ship unattended, endangering the life of anyone who came across it unaware. This danger that Donald and Mordecai were lucky to survive.
Vanku's growl carried over the open mic to every ear in the stadium. Dad continued as if he didn't hear it.
As for Donald and Mordecai, while young, you know better than to steal. You also know better than to sneak out of classes. Fortunately, I have a punishment suitable to all. Punishment for all?
Vanku scoffed loudly.
I am the victim here. Vanku will be given a new ship at my expense, but it will take long to build. During that time, Vanku will become a teacher. He will instruct Donald and Mordecai in basic ship repair and operations. I am not a teacher. I fight for the klemekoo. I bring riches to Poltid.
Dad hopped down to the stadium, and the buzz of conversation that was just starting to build as the klemekoo debated the merits of the punishment and Vanku's objection faded to a hush. When next Dad spoke, his voice boomed without the need for a microphone or stadium speakers.
You got caught. Your ship was stolen by children. You hunted with our backs turned because you did it quietly. You have gotten lazy, sloppy. You will learn a lesson by teaching. I will not!
Dead silence reigned. Ears flat and tails tucked so far they brushed belly hair, Mordo and Danu slunk backward from the confrontation. Dad stalked forward without haste.
You have 3 choices. You will leave Poltid and never return. You will obey my judgment. Or you may challenge me.
All during his approach, Dad had been gradually growing in size. By the time he stood nose to nose with Vanku, the pirate had to look straight up.
Do you wish to challenge me, Vanku?
Gone was the bluster, the swagger, the defiance. Vanku cowered with his ears back and a puddle growing beneath his hindquarters. He shook his head. At times, it was easy to forget that goofy, dorky Dad was also Kubu the Rakur, who'd learned off-world magic, unified Poltid's disparate tribes, and joined the League of Independent Planets. If Vanku wanted a fight, it would last as long as Dad let it, and no longer. Half an hour later, the twins trotted meekly behind their father as they headed home.
"We're really sorry, Dad."
"Yeah, super sorry." Dad snickered.
"Well, you can thank Mom for this punishment. I wanted to send you to live with Aunt Esper and make you learn magic."
Mordo and Donu exchanged a look of shock.
"Mars? With a war going on? Oh, it's Aunt Esper. She'd have kept you safe."
Mordo cleared his throat.
"I think we'll be happy learning from Vanku."
Thanks for listening to this Black Ocean adventure. This mission may be over, but there's plenty more for you to enjoy. For more magical mischief in the 26th century, search Black Ocean on your favorite audiobook store or visit blackoceanmissions.com. This has been Puppy Pirates of Poltid, a Black Ocean short story, written by J.S. Morin, narrated by Michael Naramore. Copyright 2023 by J.S. Morin. Production copyright 2023 by J.S. Morin.